LPT, if you have kids but get divorced, go to family counseling. At least take your kid. Even the cleanest divorces can negatively impact a child, and messy ones certainly will. You might save your kid from lifelong trauma. Normalize mental health, get them coping skills, and set them up for success. Please tell me more. Please help me. Or do this and don't do that. 48 hours ago I found out my husband of 20 years has been having casual hookup sex for years. I go in Monday for a full standard panel. I'm broken and so very angry and cannot speak to him without calling him a degenerate. We have a 7-year-old son. Of course he knows something is going on. We are staying with family for now. I never ever speak ill of his father in front of him. I'm so lost and scared. I will take all the advice I can get. My ex spoke horribly of me. I posted about parental alienation. The irony is that your STB ex may be the one to bash you. Regardless of how civil you are, my therapist always told me, kids need at least one healthy parent. Focus on being that. Read Divorce Poison. It was a godsend to me. He needs at least one healthy parent. I'm going to write that down. Thank you. LPT. Teach your kids to normalize mental health services the same way physicians are normalized. You go to a doctor when you get a fever and body aches. Go to a counselor when you get a heartache. That's what they are for. /view 200D. I have been to counseling for myself and sent my daughter for some self-help too. She just found it annoying most of the time. When I look back at the cost $, definitely not worthwhile. What makes it different for everyone else here? I always see counseling being promoted as a saving grace. While I'm sure there are some special counselors out there who have the ability to make a difference in people's lives, they are probably few and far between. Based on my experience, people have to be open to receiving help. Unfortunately, mental health care is so stigmatized and taboo to a lot of society. It's not even covered by all health insurance. I think this inaccurate perception of mental health care is part of the reason people don't embrace it, or why they find it useless. It's the same as the people who dismiss their doctor's orders to diet and exercise or quit smoking, or to take their meds. To be clear, I mean, if you get divorced, send your kid to counseling at the very least. If you can swing it, the divorced parents should also go, so they can make sure they're doing their best at co-parenting for their kid. I'm not saying that therapy is an alternative to divorce. Sometimes it can help prevent or prolong divorce, but sometimes divorce is the only option. Just make sure you get your kid or kids some help dealing with it. I'm in agreement that counseling, when feasible, is wonderful. For some of us, divorce is extremely expensive, even when it's 100% clean, just because of how courts are set up. For example, my state court judge rejected our paperwork because it wasn't to her liking, until we ended up spending $2,000 on a lawyer to get it done. That money could have been used on counseling for our children. Instead, we could not afford it. To make up for it, my ex and I have been careful to be polite and respectful to each other. It's been 3 years and I've tried to encourage the kids to share their feelings. I believe through our behavior they are doing fine. All this to say, if you can't afford counseling, please encourage your kids to share their feelings, even if it is uncomfortable for you, and be respectful and polite. When the other parent enters a new relationship, do not be unkind toward their new partner. I want to say that sometimes it is better for the kids. My parents staying together did more harm than them just breaking up. I added a comment to clarify. This LPT is for during/after an unavoidable divorce. Not saying counseling is a substitute for divorce. A legitimate LPT. My sibs and I still have after effects of our parents' nasty divorce many years ago. Very traumatizing. Same. And my parents had a pretty clean divorce. And what if you can't afford a $200+ an hour counselor? I'm a clinical psychologist in training, and there's a community clinic at my university that offers affordable therapy. There are options out there. They're unfortunately not well publicized and sometimes have a waiting list. My ex and I work our asses off to make sure our son is the least negatively impacted by our divorce as possible. We have a great relationship. We still ended up taking him to a counselor. Even good divorces are anxiety inducing. Excellent parenting right here. As a teacher, I agree. I see so many kids over many years as I work at a small school and get to know kids for years before they are in my classroom. Kids of divorce often come in late with dark eyes that were crying in the car a few minutes ago and think nobody can tell. We can. We just don't want to make you feel any more vulnerable by saying it. We want to create a safe, predictable space for you. Kids of divorce are often innocent victims in this process and need special help. They often go it alone without skills. This is such a common issue, where millions of kids go through acting like it's never been done before. We should have a playbook and special training just for this. Absolutely, I don't believe any amount of therapy will reconcile the differences between my parents. But I do wish I could have had some sort of therapy as a kid. I was 14 though and boldly insisted to myself the divorce didn't affect me at 27. I'm only just now realizing what some element of the divorce and the actions around it have done to me and how it affected the way I think about certain things. It did not help that neither of my parents were very emotionally mature and both made their attempts at weaponizing me against the other. But, even as Op says, even clean divorces are still divorces. My school tried to help and let me talk with one of our school counselors. But like, okay, would you want to tell anyone, even an hour counselor employed by your company, that you work with about your problems? That is how the school felt. I never wanted to be honest because it was school still. Hey man, I feel you. I'm convinced the worst time to experience your parents' divorce is around 13 to 15 years old. It's a really vulnerable time for a young teenager who's going through puberty, just trying to figure out dating, high school, etc. It has lifelong and lasting effects. Really rough. You are also old enough to understand the implications of the divorce, the heartache and trouble the family will go through. And yet not really old enough to know how to process it. I can't fully agree with this cause it's not for everyone. Like my parents got divorced when I was 14. And I was upset with it at first, for like 2 days, and after that, I just started looking at the positive. Like twice the vacations, twice the presents, and whatever makes my parents happier. That's all that mattered. So I'd say try to outline the positives, at least the first 2 points, and yeah, I'd be surprised at how many children are mentally strong enough to handle a divorce. If it's a messy divorce, then probably should go to therapy. But a clean divorce, like my parents, always felt normal, and the only hard part was going to each house on their designated days. It should at least be an option for the kid. There are always exceptions. But many kids don't even get the opportunity because parents think they can handle it themselves or that professional mental help is taboo. Finances are a legitimate limiting factor for some. But even then many public schools and community centers offer mental health services or at least support groups free of charge. Yeah, I agree that it should be an option. But I feel like that's also a difficult thing because I feel like a lot of kids, even if it does bother them, they would bottle it up and not talk to their parents about it for one reason or another. Although many kids would of course take it if they feel they need it. But also if they're young, they may not think they need it even though they do. This is great advice. My ex cheated on me, had me arrested, and kept my daughter from me for 50 days. He told her I moved away from her. He stole from me and stopped paying the mortgage on the house we bought, destroying my credit. He is currently living in said house with the woman he cheated on me with and their son. He refuses to communicate with me regarding our daughter. I'm terrified how this is going to affect her. She is on her 3rd therapist. I hope this mitigates some of the issues she will have with men as she gets older. Finding a good therapist that you trust is the key. My parents had a great divorce. They were great team members and did a damn good job keeping their BS out of me and my siblings' view. I still went through significant behavioral issues and fought depression for years. I really fell behind in school and got in trouble with the law in the years following their divorce. I have finally got my act together, but I truly lost like 8 to 10 years of progress due to not being emotionally able to cope, and this was even with plenty of counseling. Divorce is absolutely fucked. Make good decisions about who you marry, my friends. Unless your kid doesn't want to go, don't force your kid, who already may be having a lot of negative feelings about you, to go talk to someone for an hour every week and be more miserable. I hated that therapy more than the fact my parents got divorced, and it turned me off of therapy for a long time. The title only allowed so many words. Obviously there are exceptions. Many kids though aren't even offered the chance or know that there is someone to talk to. It's called an adverse childhood experience, or ACE. There is a list of things that qualify as an ACE, depending on how many ACEs a child experiences and the severity of those ACEs. It will likely lead to a lifetime of mental health issues. So, yeah, if you get divorced and you have kids, take them to a good therapist. aces2highlink.com/. And honestly, plan to keep them in there until they're adults. I took mine for several years. Thought they were fine and eventually discontinued it. Then my kids hit the teen years and suddenly depression, anxiety, trauma. I don't think it's new. I think it's that now they can articulate what they're feeling. They're back in now, but I wish I hadn't ever pulled them out. If only my parents did this. This should also go for parents who should get divorced but don't. My parents split up when I was 7, but they spent the next 11 years being one parental unit. When I wrecked the car at 15, Mom didn't hesitate to call my dad at 10:30 at night and have him drive over so they could talk to me. They couldn't be married, but they had 3 kids who still needed 2 parents, and they were one front. Every time, they figured their shit out, even when they couldn't stand each other, and then presented one face to us. I cannot emphasize how important that was. Never one parent putting the other down. Never using us against the other. I knew lots of kids growing up and now as adults, and we got off very fortunate in that respect. I'm so grateful for how hard they worked for us. My parents divorced when I was 9. They didn't fight. They remained friends. I got as much time with either of them as I wanted. Took me years to figure out why that happened. From my perspective, it was just all over one day. My parents' issue was that they constantly badmouthed each other. I'm currently in the life of a child whose mother does this. In the custody agreement she had it put in that both parents have to agree on counseling. She's been asked to consent multiple times and refuses because she thinks it'll mean her child is messed up. From my experience as a child in this situation, it's just nice to have somebody to talk to who is unbiased and willing to listen to you without making you feel like you'll get in trouble for what you're saying. My parents did this when they divorced. We only went to one session and the guy we saw had a lazy eye, and it was just weird. At least my parents showed some effort in making the divorce easy, and the counselor wasn't necessary. I wish my sister had done this. She said her kids didn't need counseling. And neither did she. They did need it. They all did. One niece finally got some mental health help in college, and her mother yelled at her for it. Her youngest son shows signs of depression, but she won't do anything for him either. My sister herself has anger issues and probably depression of some kind, maybe bipolar disorder, but she thinks counseling is for weaklings. I learned about 15 years ago from someone I trusted who was nearing retirement as a family counselor / therapist that kids always think the divorce is their fault, even when they hide that belief from their parents. He said it was the only absolute he had seen in his decades of work. I can't validate the observation with any scientific evidence, but his description has had a powerful impact on my views ever since. I mean, anecdotally speaking, I felt guilty for failing to stop my parents from fighting. I'd argue that lack of success gets blurred really easily with shame and guilt for kids. I remember taping peace sign drawings around the house, and I even made a no smoking sign, but instead of a cigarette it was the word drugs lol. I was 7 or younger. Can't remember the exact age, but that's when we were still stuck living with my dad. My dad didn't exactly try to hide his addiction from me, so my mom really didn't have a choice but to explain it to me. This way, I knew it was wrong and why we had to stay in hotels sometimes. why she was saving money for us to move out, etc. I'd write letters to Santa saying I didn't need any toys, but I just wanted my dad to stop using drugs lol. This was my day wish, blowing out candles too. I felt like it was my responsibility. I thought by little me intervening I could help them work it out and cure addiction lol. I finally stopped feeling so responsible in counseling when I started to grasp concepts of fault and accountability and being in control of no one's behavior but your own. I think some would criticize my mom for being so honest with me, but I'm glad she was. Even as a kid, I needed truth to function. And I'm glad she knew her own little kid well enough to see that. I think knowing the dangers of smoking, alcohol, drugs, and booze and seeing firsthand what addiction does to a person is what kept me from turning to those very things as a teenager and young adult after such a childhood. I also had to be responsible for myself at a young age with my mom never home, since she was working 3 jobs and going to school. I certainly kept my head on straight and knew right from wrong, just to keep from ending up like my dad and to make sure I turned out as awesome as my mom. Counseling facilitated all of this for me and helped me navigate my own development. Absolutely. Children are going to build resilience emotionally based on the emotional resilience demonstrated and fostered by caregivers. The best thing we can do for our kids is give them the skills to care for themselves by modeling this behavior ourselves. I was young when my parents separated, only 2 years old, so it didn't affect me until I was older, and that was mostly because they practically detested each other and custody was always a fight. Lived with mom and saw dad every other weekend and some holidays. They couldn't hold a conversation without ending up yelling. They spoke bad about each other in front of me or even to me, and I was often in the middle of custody arguments. Really came to a head when my dad asked me if I wanted to live with him when I was 15. Mom found out and guilt tripped the crap out of me to make sure I didn't want to. Even went so far as to say my dad wanted an abortion when she was pregnant with me. Don't know if it's true. Never really followed up. Wanted to put that behind me. Dad found out about that. Loads of arguments. Stressful and traumatic as all hell. So yeah, don't involve kids in that garbage. It's not fair to them. I got divorced a few years ago with 2 boys who were 12 and 8 then. I couldn't get them to go to a therapist as they both refused. I knew that would help them as ours was a nasty divorce. They both would refuse to go, and my ex-wife wasn't a big fan, so she never encouraged them either. Now 4 years later, I still wish somehow I could have gotten them to go as I think they still are scarred from it. I don't think I can convince them to go even now, and don't know what to do. Just keep being a loving and caring parent. Tell them you will always be there for them, and if they ever feel like they need to talk about stuff with a third party then you will make them an appointment. Wish my mom had done that for any one of the 4 divorces we went through. This is great advice. Thank you. My parents had what would be called a very clean and easy divorce when I was 17, and it has definitely affected me in life. Hey, thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.